Have you ever had an idea that you secretly believed could change your life? But every time you thought about starting, another voice inside your head said, "What if you fail? What if people laugh at you? What if you're simply not good enough?" So you wait. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week becomes next month, and eventually the dream that once excited you becomes something you barely talk about anymore. But here's the strange thing. Sometimes failure isn't what stops us. Sometimes it's the fear of discovering what failure might say about us. And what if that fear is based on a lie? What if you don't need confidence before you begin? What if confidence is something you only discover after you begin? Today, I want to tell you the story of a young man named Noah. Noah had a dream that almost nobody believed in, but the biggest person he had to convince wasn't his family, his friends, or the people in his town. It was himself. And what happened when Noah finally stopped waiting to feel ready changed the way he looked at failure forever. So if there is something you've been putting off because you don't believe you're ready, stay until the end, because you may realize that the confidence you've been waiting for isn't missing. You've simply never given it a chance to grow. Noah lived in a quiet town where almost everyone knew everyone. He wasn't the smartest person in town. He wasn't the most talented. He wasn't especially brave either, but Noah had one quality that he couldn't seem to turn off. He was always curious. Whenever something broke, he wanted to know why. Whenever someone complained about a problem, Noah immediately started thinking about how it could be fixed. If a door made a strange sound, he wanted to inspect the hinges. If a bicycle chain kept falling off, he wanted to understand what was wrong with it. If a machine stopped working, Noah couldn't walk past it without wondering how it worked in the first place. There was just one problem. Noah rarely trusted his own ideas. Whenever he thought of something, he immediately imagined all the reasons it wouldn't work. One evening, he was sitting outside his family's small repair shop when he noticed something. Several shopkeepers nearby were struggling with their electricity bills. During power cuts, they had to stop working. Some used expensive fuel-powered generators. Others simply closed their shops until the electricity returned. Noah started thinking, what if there was a simple device that could store enough energy during the day to keep a small shop running during short power outages? The idea wasn't revolutionary, but Noah believed he could build a simple version using affordable parts. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely excited. Then the doubts arrived. What if the device didn't work? What if the parts were too expensive? What if people laughed at him? What if someone told him it was a stupid idea? And then came the thought that stopped him completely. What if I try? And discover that I'm not as capable as I thought? Noah closed his notebook. Maybe later, he thought. Maybe when he knew more. Maybe when he had better tools. Maybe when someone experienced told him it was possible. And that night, he went to sleep feeling safe, but also disappointed, because nothing had gone wrong, and yet he had still lost. For several days, Noah ignored the idea, but the problem kept appearing in front of him. Every evening, shopkeepers complained about the power cuts. One afternoon, an elderly shop owner named Samuel was closing his store early because the electricity had disappeared again. Noah watched him lock the door. "You're closing already?" Noah asked. Samuel smiled tiredly. "What choice do I have?" Noah hesitated. "I might have an idea." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Might?" Noah laughed nervously. "I'm still working it out." Samuel looked at him for a moment. "Then work it out." Those 3 words stayed with Noah. Not prove it, not guarantee it, not make sure it works, just work it out. That evening, Noah opened his notebook again. He drew a rough design. Then another, then another. He calculated what he could. He watched tutorials. He studied old components, he asked questions, and eventually he bought a few inexpensive parts. His first prototype took him 12 days. It looked terrible. The wires were messy. The frame leaned slightly to one side, and when Noah finally switched it on, nothing happened. He checked the connections. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. Noah stared at the device, then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because he didn't know what else to do. He had spent nearly 2 weeks building something that didn't even turn on. For a moment he felt that familiar voice returning. "See? You knew this wouldn't work. You should have listened to yourself." Noah almost threw the entire thing into a box. But instead, he wrote one sentence in his notebook. "The first version doesn't work." He stared at the sentence. Then he added another. "That doesn't mean I can't make the second version better." It was a small distinction, but it changed everything. Noah rebuilt the device. The second version turned on for about 30 seconds. Then it overheated. The third version lasted 5 minutes. Then one of the connections burned out. The fourth version worked for nearly an hour. Then the battery failed. Each time Noah discovered something new. Each failure cost him time. Some cost him money, and some damaged his confidence. But something else was changing too. He was learning how to solve problems. One evening, Noah took the fourth prototype to a nearby shop. A few people gathered around. Noah explained what he had built. One man laughed. "Why are you wasting your time on this?" Another said, "You should leave engineering to people who actually know what they're doing." Noah felt his face become hot. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to prove them wrong, but he didn't. He simply picked up the prototype and went home. That night, he didn't work on it. He sat quietly at his desk, and for the first time, he asked himself a different question. Not, "Do I believe I can succeed?" but, "Do I believe I can learn?" The answer was yes. He didn't know whether the final device would work. He didn't know whether anyone would buy it. He didn't know whether the people laughing at him would ever change their minds. But he knew one thing. He could learn, and maybe that was enough. The next morning, Noah started again. He changed the battery system. He redesigned the cooling mechanism. He simplified the wiring. He made the frame stronger. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, the device became better. But Noah's biggest improvement wasn't happening inside the machine. It was happening inside his mind. He stopped treating every mistake like a verdict. When something broke, he asked, "What caused this?" When something didn't work, he asked, "What can I change?" When someone criticized him, he asked, "Is there something useful in what they said?" And when there wasn't, he simply continued. That was new for Noah. Before, criticism could stop him for weeks. Now, it might bother him for an hour. Before, one mistake could make him question his entire ability. Now, one mistake was simply another problem to solve. He wasn't fearless. He was becoming resilient, and there is a huge difference. One rainy afternoon, Noah carried his latest prototype into Samuel's shop. The design looked completely different from the first one. Smaller, cleaner, more efficient. Samuel looked at it. "So," he said, "does it work?" Noah paused. He remembered how he used to answer that question. "I think it will." But this time he said, "Let's find out." Samuel smiled. Noah connected the device. The lights came on. They stayed on. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. An hour. The electricity was still out, but the shop remained open. Samuel looked around. For the first time that evening, there was light inside his store. He smiled. "You actually did it." Noah looked at the device. Then he smiled too. But something unexpected happened. He didn't feel like a completely different person. He was still nervous. He still wondered whether the device could be improved. He still knew there were problems to solve. And that's when Noah finally understood something. He had been waiting for confidence to arrive like a feeling. He expected one morning to wake up and suddenly think, I can do anything. But confidence didn't arrive that way. It had been built quietly, every time he tried again, every time he learned something, every time he survived another mistake, every time he chose progress instead of embarrassment. His confidence wasn't created by success. It was created by evidence, evidence that he could struggle and continue, evidence that he could fail and learn, evidence that he could be criticized and keep moving, evidence that he could enter an unfamiliar situation and figure things out. Years later, people in nearby towns began using Noah's devices. Whenever someone asked him how he became so confident, Noah would often smile. Then he'd say, I wasn't confident when I started. People would look surprised. So what made you begin? Noah would answer, I got tired of waiting. And that may be one of the most important lessons you can learn, because many people aren't actually waiting for the right opportunity. They're waiting for the right feeling. They want to feel confident. They want to feel prepared. They want to feel certain. They want to know that everything will work before they take the first step. But life doesn't usually give us that guarantee. You don't become confident and then take action. Very often you take action, and then confidence begins. Is there something you've been postponing? Maybe you've wanted to start a business. Maybe you've wanted to learn a new skill. Maybe you've wanted to create videos. Maybe you've wanted to write a book. Maybe you've wanted to go back to school. Maybe you've wanted to change your habits. Maybe you've wanted to leave behind something that no longer makes you happy. And every time you think about beginning, you tell yourself, I'm not ready. But ask yourself something. How many times have you called yourself not ready when what you really meant was, I'm afraid to find out what happens if I try? There is a difference. Being unprepared means you need to learn. Being afraid means you're human. Neither one means you have to stop. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be the best. You don't need everyone's approval. And you definitely don't need a guarantee of success. You need a reason to take the next step. That's it. The next step. Not the next 100 steps. Just one. Imagine someone learning to swim. They can read 100 books about swimming. They can watch 1,000 videos. They can study every technique. But eventually they have to enter the water. And the first time, they may panic. The second time, they may still be uncomfortable. But with practice, the water becomes familiar. The fear decreases. The ability increases. And eventually, something that once seemed impossible becomes normal. Life works the same way. You don't think your way into confidence. You practice your way into it. You act your way into it. You learn your way into it. And sometimes you fail your way into it, because failure teaches you something success cannot. It teaches you that you can survive disappointment. It teaches you that one bad result doesn't destroy you. It teaches you that you can start again. So never confuse a bad outcome with a bad identity. You failed an interview. That doesn't mean you're unemployable. Your business didn't work. That doesn't mean you're incapable of building another one. Someone rejected your idea. That doesn't mean the idea has no value. You made a terrible decision. That doesn't mean you're a terrible person. You struggled today. That doesn't mean you're going to struggle forever. A mistake is an event. It is not your identity. A failure is information. It is not a permanent label, and a difficult chapter is still only one chapter. It isn't the entire story. Perhaps that's what Noah learned more than anything else. He stopped asking, am I good enough? And started asking, what can I do next? That question is powerful, because am I good enough can keep you frozen. But what can I do next creates movement. You don't have to solve your entire life tonight. You don't have to become fearless. You don't have to become perfect. You don't even have to believe completely in yourself. Sometimes you only need enough belief to make one attempt, then another, and eventually those attempts become experience. Experience becomes ability. Ability becomes evidence, and evidence becomes confidence. So if you've been waiting for confidence, stop waiting for the perfect feeling. Start small. Take the class, make the first video, send the application, open the notebook, build the prototype, practice the skill, have the conversation, take the first uncomfortable step, and if it doesn't work, learn, change something, try again, because your first attempt doesn't need to be impressive. It only needs to exist. Your first video doesn't need to be perfect. Your first business doesn't need to be huge. Your first drawing doesn't need to be beautiful. Your first attempt at anything doesn't need to prove that you're talented. It only needs to prove that you're willing to begin. And maybe one day you'll look back at the person you used to be. You'll remember how scared you were, how much you doubted yourself, how many times you almost quit, and you'll realize something beautiful. The confident person you were waiting to become was being built by every small action you took while you were still afraid. You didn't find confidence, you built it. One attempt at a time, one lesson at a time, one failure at a time, one decision to continue at a time. So here's the question I want you to think about today. What would you start if you knew you didn't have to be confident yet? Think about it. Because there may be something in your life that you've been waiting to begin, and maybe you don't need another sign. Maybe you don't need another person to approve it. Maybe you don't need another month of preparation. Maybe you simply need to take the first step. You are allowed to be a beginner. You are allowed to be nervous. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to fail. But don't allow one uncomfortable moment to convince you that you are incapable of becoming better. Start before you feel completely ready. Learn while you move. Let your actions create the evidence. And let that evidence slowly build the confidence you were waiting for. Because sometimes the person who needs to believe in you first is you. Welcome to Jerry Tales. If this story gave you something to think about, don't just watch it and forget it. Think about one thing you've been avoiding because you don't feel ready. Then ask yourself, what is the smallest step I can take today? And if you're willing to take that step, tell me in the comments. I want to know what you're going to begin. And remember, you don't need confidence to start. Sometimes, starting is how you find it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Jerry Tales for more motivational stories, powerful life lessons, and stories designed to help you become stronger, wiser, and better than yesterday. I'll see you in the next story.